buying anything to do anything with yet. I'm just sharing my process of learning, which is influenced by many other people in the American Aborigine community, American Indian community, autochthonous people community. I'm very thankful for finding like-minded people who know because it was part of their oral history or they just put two and two together. So this is brought to us by the National Park Service, U.S. Department of Interior. Can we trust them? I don't know, but this is what they have to say about it. So this is the Park Ethnography Program. And let's look at what is ethnography. It has something to do with ethnicity, doesn't it? Before I do that reading, I got to keep this short.
Ethnography.
Ethnography. The scientific description of the customs of individual peoples and cultures. I'm not going to open this. Saying that this word is from the Greek ethnos, meaning folk or people, nation, and right, grapho, right, is a systematic study of people and cultures. It is designed to explore cultural phenomena where the researcher observes society from the point of view of the subject of the study. All right, that's good enough. So that's what this is. That's what the U.S. Department of Interior is bringing to us. And here's what they have to say about it. Work, marriage, Christianity. Many of these early slaves were American Indians, mostly Algonquin speakers of coastal Virginia and North Carolina. By the 1680s, English settlers routinely kidnapped Native American women, Native American or American Indian. So we know now, and if you don't know, then we are sure that the Native American and the American Indian are two different cultural people, coming or existing separately, and maybe, of course, having some inner relationships. So this Native American slave trade involved a number of colonies, including Virginia, Carolina, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, Jamaica, Barbados, St. Kitts, and Nevis. So many Indian slaves were traded. So many Indian slaves were traded to Pennsylvania that a law was passed in 1705 forbidding the importation of Carolina Indian slaves. This was done in part because many of the slaves were Tuscarora, who were aligned militarily with the Iraqi Confederacy, which threatened to intervene to stop the trade. And I am noting that I would like to go back and take a look at that. From 1680 to 1715, the English sold thousands of Indians into slavery, some as far away as the Caribbean. Indian slavery, however, had many problems, not the least of which were Indian attacks. And by 1720, most colonies in North America had abandoned it for African slavery. In 1670, Virginia passed a law defining slavery as a lifelong inheritable racial status. After the passage of this law, many Black Indians found themselves classified as Black and forced into slavery. In the fields and homes of colonial plantations, mutually enslaved African Americans, so they became African Americans when they hit the ground, or are they just Africans at this point? The confusion is in the way the people who do the research and put this stuff down interchange words rather than being consistent. That was my sidebar. In the fields and homes of colonial plantations, mutually enslaved African Americans and American Indians forged their first intimate relations. In spite of a later tendency in the southern colonies to differentiate the African slave from the Indian, chattel slavery was built on a pre-existing system of Indian slavery. So chattel slavery was built on a pre-existing system of Indian slavery? Because I'm now, okay, this is another sidebar, because I thought that chattel slavery was built on a system of African slavery. Now, I don't, something else I have to look into. Chattel slavery. You know what? It's chattel slavery. I'm going to do it. I promise I'm going to try to keep this short. A chattel slave is an enslaved person who is owned forever and whose children and children's children are automatically enslaved. Chattel slaves are individuals treated as complete property to be bought and sold. Chattel slavery was supported and made legal by European governments and monarchs. Is it just me? All right. Even though the arrival of Africans in 1619 began to change the face of slavery in North America from tawny Indian to blackamoor African, so in 1619 is when the face of slavery began to change, because I could have sworn that 1619, but here it says from 1680 the English sold thousands of Indians. So now, okay, I will assume then that earlier than 1619. Okay, don't judge me because I don't have history in my head, because I'm sure there's something I should know about the 1500s or before that I have to read again or hear again to say, oh, okay. But anyway, so 1690 began to change the face of slavery in North America. Tawny Indians became Blackamoor Africans. Indian slaves were exported throughout the Caribbean, often in trade for Africans. So they Africans now. As the 18th century dawned, the slave trade in American Indians was so serious that it eclipsed the trade for furs and skins and had become the primary source of commerce between the English and the South Carolina colonials. Who is the South Carolina colonials? The South Carolina colony's original settlers were English plantation owners who relied on slavery to keep their operations running and profitable. The South Carolina colony plantation grew a variety of crops, including tobacco, cotton, tobacco, vegetables, fruit, and livestock. Okay. Okay. So American Indians were, it says again that as the 18th century dawned, the slave trade in American Indians was so serious that it eclipsed the trade for furs and skins, and had become the primary source of commerce between the English and the South Carolina colonies. Okay, so right. So the trade of American Indians then was the primary source of commerce rather than fur and skins as the 18th century dawned. During this transitional period, Africans and American Indians, there's putting it straight, shared the common experience of enslavement. They worked together, lived together in communal quarters, produced collective recipes for food, shared herbal remedies, myths, and legends, and in the end, they intermarried. Africans had a disproportionate number of males in their population, while Native American women, okay, now up here they were American Indians. All of a sudden here they're Native American women and children. Anyway, they were disproportionately enslaved. American Indian males were shipped to the Caribbean, died in wars or of European diseases. As traditional societies in the Southeast were primarily matrilineal, African males who married American Indians women often became members of the wife's clan and her nation, as it should be. You don't become African, you become an Indian. Francis Lejeune described a prophetic Christianity that developed in the African American community. Now, any other place, when you say another culture in America, you're talking about that culture of people bringing their culture, man, woman, and child, into the country and coexisting amongst the people, not becoming the people. Like when the Chinese people come, they're Chinese and they're intermarrying and having children with their own people. Prove me wrong. Somebody prove me wrong. Francis Lejeune, I guess, described okay, so I'm a little bit further down in that. Let me just go back. Francis Lejeune described a prophetic Christianity that developed in the African American community in the Carolina colony. Because of their close association with American Indians through work and marriage in these areas of the South, the Muskoks were instructed in the Christian religion by multilingual African American linksters. Some scholars argue that the African Americans, which would mean at this point, which should mean Africans that are coexisting in America, not intermingling with the Americans. So some scholars argue that the African Americans who passed on a spiritually inspired critical view of the English that eventually led to American Indian Rebellion. What's a linkster? A golfer? I don't have on my readers. A golfer. Oh. Urban Dictionary is the first one that's popping up without going into anything. And it's saying a man who is cool with everyone and is down for whatever. Probably the most hardcore dude in the office. Really? Let's say Linkster 1800s. 18th century definition. Okay, so let's go with this one. What do they have to say? Another. So I can't get it. Oh, I have to accept something. Why? Cookies. I gotta get a cookie. Ain't no way around it. Okay, let me go back. Let's see. So, see if we can get it right here. Linkster. So we're gonna just have to assume link, a connection, and a linkster is the person who is going to make the connection. So this is probably this is just my thoughts. This is probably the linkster, the one who is going to, it's going to bring us together, right? All right, so some scholars argue that the African Americans also passed on a spiritually inspired critical view of the English that eventually led led to American Indian Rebellion. That's this for some reason this paragraph is kind of stumping me. So I guess they just want to put this out here, but don't want to get into it really. So that's something to look at. Oh, the Daniels family, 20th century Texan. Descendants of Florida, Afro-Indian. The Afro come first when you are on the Indians' land. That's the Black Seminole. It appears they're trying to say, okay, this is the African, and this is the Indian, and this is the Afro-Indian. They should have been called the Indi African or something like that. Maybe it would have been more appropriate. You're being absorbed. I'm here. This is where I was. Now I'm starting to get a little, try to keep my composure here. The 1740 slave codes of South Carolina served to blur the distinction between African, American Indian, and the children of their intermarriage, declaring all Negroes and Indians. So the Negroes now are the African. Okay, because that's the word that changed. Okay, that's what they're saying. All Negroes and Indians, free Indians in amity with this government, and Negroes, mulattoes, and mestizos who are now free, accepted. Mulattoes and mestizos who are now or shall hereafter be in this province, and all their issue and offspring shall be, and they are hereby declared to be and remain hereafter absolute slaves. And then there's a reference, which I have to get to. Even so, the next century would see the development of independent mixed blood communities. The most notable, those that participated in the African Seminole Indian Wars in Florida. Most of the early records of the missionaries note that enslaved African American living in American Indian communities were among the first converts to Christianity. Some of these religious leaders were African or Afro-Amerindian who during the colonial period lived among Eastern Muskoka, Seminole, Cherokee, Choctaw, and Chickasaw. There's a reference. In the cultural nexus of 18th century, integrated community of the early American frontier, African and American Indian peoples shared a common religious experience. Galvin Town in South Carolina was such a plantation community and trading center. Interestingly, the first recorded Negro Baptist church was organized nearby a Silver Bluff, South Carolina in 1773 or 1775. Members of Galvin's family were patrons of the church at Silver Bluff. Okay, and that's what they have to say. This is Chief Black Coat. I'll take a look at who is Chief Black Coat. See if we can find his descendants. Meanwhile, I think I will end this stream here. I hope it's going to be beneficial to someone. I'm going to keep at it. I will live stream as I can, wherever I am, if I come across something that I think will help let my people go. Let my people go.